Paul here. I'm going to show you today how to change a transmission fluid and the filter. Now this only gets rid of about half the ATF, so it's not a full flush. If you want to do that, you got to drain the torque converter. But this is pretty good routine maintenance, especially on trucks like this here 1991 Ranger. Transmissions have a habit of blowing up, so you want to do it at the heavy duty cycle, which is about, I'd say every 20,000 miles. In order to drain the transmission, you want to clean it off because you don't want any of the dirt and grime getting in there. I lost my brush this time, but I scraped it off with a screwdriver. Now, if you don't have a drain bolt, you're going to have to drain it by loosening all the bolts around the pan and letting the fluid come out. It makes a mess, but you got to do it. I like to pop all the bolts, then they get finger loose, and then you want to slowly work towards the back with the drain pan in position until you start getting a fluid leak out of one of the corners. Now, I forgot to mention, the transmission's got to be hot when you service it, so you want to keep your skin clear, and this is one of those few times I suggest you wear gloves. But it's gonna drain for a while, so remember to just let it go, and while you're waiting, grab a beer. I've got no way to film the next step, but all the transmission fluid from the level down is still in there, so it's gonna really be spilly when we take it off. So just try not to make too big a mess. Now, for those of you who don't know what you're looking at, this is the transmission filter right here. We're gonna pull him out and then take the two O-rings off. You gotta remove a 10mm bolt to get it out. I missed that part. You wanna make sure the old O-rings are still on here, otherwise they're up still under the car. And you wanna double gasket it. Now, as far as I can tell, this aftermarket filter will fit, but it doesn't look the same. This is an aftermarket filter itself, so it probably goes on multiple applications. The real important part is the height of the fill neck. One of the best ways to tell what's going on in your transmission is this black powder is pretty normal. What you don't want to see is you don't want to see any metal clippings in here or anything. Now, I went ahead and I scraped off the gasket. I'm gonna go ahead and wash this sucker out. It's probably best to wash it out and air blow it if you can, just with some compressed air, you know. I don't have any because my compressor's busted, but we'll make do. Transmission gaskets really punish you if you don't get everything perfect, so it's worth the time to put in the extra mile, and you really don't want all these little rocks and everything I picked up off the ground here to get into your transmission. Fast forward a bit, we've got it all nice and clean. I'm gonna put the gasket on now. I went ahead and went with this ATP brand. They promise that it'll hold the bolts in and make installation easier. We'll see how that goes. Got everything back together. It turns out that that funky filter was actually off an Explorer, so we were alright to put it back on. That ATP gasket set worked pretty good. Everything came back up. This wasn't really that hard of an install and not much to show. If it sounds really easy, it's because it is. One thing I want to get into though is the torque wrench. You want to torque up your pan bolts to the spec, otherwise it leaks, and like I said, transmissions are kind of picky. You don't want to deal with it again. Now, one thing about torque wrenches is you should always store them relaxed. Now, if you happen to come into your box and you find that it hasn't been relaxed, you can screw it out, let it sit for 5 minutes. If you don't do that, it's not accurate. Other thing, you got to learn kind of how to feel with one of these. You try not to use extensions. 9 times out of 10, it'll click on the inside, but it won't be an audible click, so feel for that. So we'll torque her up, get her filled up, and then she's good to go. Now you want to add back in transmission fluid. Note the brand. I'm of the opinion that if you replace it a lot, it doesn't have to be expensive. In this case, we want 3 quarts. Once you've refilled the transmission, you want to shift it through all the gears so the pump engages and kicks the fluid around. Also, just make sure that it shifts. And that's all there is to it. Basically, you want to do this, the box says every 12,000 miles, but I say 200. And you also want to change the transmission fluid anytime you sink the whole transmission into water. So if you live in one of them states where you guys get a mud, I would definitely recommend putting in a drain plug, even if you don't care about the transmission like this one. It'll just save you a bunch of time.